Just to give you a little background, my name is Kendra Barnhart. I am located in the Chambersburg office. Have been with SEK for a little over 3 years now, but been dealing with QuickBooks for, I'm only 20 years old, so for 15 years, obviously. So, no, been started out with majorly desktop, but have been learning online by dealing with a lot of our great clients here in the Chambersburg office. Let Mandy introduce herself.
So I am Mandy Walls, and I am located officially in North Carolina. However, I work out of the Chambersburg office. So if you happen to be reaching out to me, I am mostly remote most of the time. I've been with the firm since 2009, left for almost a year, and then came back. So
she's the best thing that came out of COVID for us.
Yes, there were good things. I have been working with QuickBooks since my time at SEK, so since 2009, mostly desktop, and most of my clients are still in desktop, but I have been venturing out into QBO a little bit more. And then I do a whole variety of things throughout the firm. Payroll, accounting service, 1099, sales tax, tax returns. So a little bit of everything.
And like Christina also said in the beginning, we do want this to be very informal. I have my participants window open. So hopefully if you guys have a question as we're going through, feel free to raise your hand. Don't feel like you're interrupting us. We want to make sure that everybody's getting all the information that you are here for. So if you have a couple more specific questions, we're going to give kind of a high overview. Go ahead and feel free to ask us any and all questions you have. I will say we are going to be using sample files today, so we are kind of limited in what we can show you, especially in QuickBooks Online. We will do our very best to walk you through the steps, but unfortunately with the sample files, they tie our hands behind our back. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. We had quite a few questions, as I mentioned before, and we're going to try to go through them as logistically as possible. So how we wanted to start today was to go over the year-end process. Okay, it's November 21st. 12/31 is going to be here before any of us want to admit. So what should you be doing now to kind of get yourself set up for success in January? So going over year-end processes, what we as a CPA firm do, there's 4 main things that I want to go over. The first step sounds simple, but is something that we find a lot of companies don't do, is bank reconciliations. There is no better way to make sure that everything is entered into your QuickBooks software than by going through and doing bank reconciliations. Not necessarily for savings accounts or anything like that, but your main operating account, if you have a payroll account, any sort of checking account that you are using on a regular basis, go through and do your bank reconciliations. That is the surefire way to know that if you wrote a check for an expense, it is recorded. And along those lines, if you run across a transaction that you are not sure where it goes, let's say you bought a piece of equipment and you're not sure if it should be expensed, if it should be put in as an asset, if it's a one-off expense that you're not sure where it should go. If you do not have an account called Ask My Accountant, create it. Put it in there as another expense. From our point of view, it's a lot easier to start in that account. I know for me personally, that's the first account I go through when I'm going through a client's books, is I look for that Ask My Accountant expense account. Go through those. It's a lot easier for it to be literally in our face that you have a question about that account or that expense or that income even. There's a lot of townships. If you have a grant or something of that nature that you're not sure how it should be recorded, throw it and Ask My Accountant. That way we can have a conversation about what needs to happen with that. Next thing that we would suggest is to pull up some comparison reports. Pull up your profit and loss and then go into customize, or even there's a P&L comparison, and just pull up even just last year. Look for any abnormalities. Let's say you had $10,000 in advertising and promotion last year, but this year you have 30. All right, let's take a look at that and make sure that everything in there is truly classified correctly. Something we see a lot, especially for those in QuickBooks Online who are using the bank transaction screen. When you're adding those transactions, QuickBooks Online thinks it's smarter than you and will change like every check that is written. If you put utility expense for the first check in line, every check below that, it's going to change to utilities expense. And sometimes, we're doing, happens to us too. We're just going through the motions and clicking add, and not realizing that we're adding stuff incorrectly. Case in point, this is a lady who even works for us. She was doing bookkeeping for a client, not super familiar with QuickBooks Online, and she selected one check to add and didn't realize that she had selected multiple and had all of those going to utilities expense. We pulled a profit and loss comparison at the end of the year and said, hey, why is their utilities increased by $25,000? Well, that's why, because there was some checks that were misappropriated. So that's always a good thing to look at. Look for any abnormalities, if I can speak here. Look for those on your P&L comparisons. That's also a good way to catch, sometimes income is misappropriated too. Or bank fees. Bank fees is something that, if you want to separate that out. The next thing to look at is pull up your balance sheet. We see this all the time, negative liabilities. So a liability would be your bank loans, your payroll liabilities, anything like that. Negative liabilities on your balance sheet is also a red flag. Just kind of take a look and see there. One example is I had a client who had automatic child support payments coming out. It was a fairly large client. They didn't realize that the employee who was paying child support quit and so they were no longer collecting the child support, but were making child support payments on his behalf. Turned into a whole mess with the state. But by looking at that negative liability, because it was being posted correctly, they realized, hey, we now have to fight with the state to get that money back. But yeah, negative liabilities would be a red flag for you. There was one question about recording asset sales. So that is almost a conversation that you need to have with your CPA firm and the person who is preparing your taxes on how to properly record that in your QuickBooks file. There's a lot of factors to consider whenever you're recording those sales, or even whenever you're purchasing that asset. What is the depreciation going to look like? If you only had that piece of equipment for a year or two, what was the depreciation on there? How much did you sell it for? Is it a gain? Is it a loss? That's kind of too complex to answer broadly. So unfortunately, my answer for that is confer with whoever is preparing your tax return on how you would like to record those asset sales. Going down through, is there any other questions?
I'll just chime in here on the asset sales. I do have clients that will they created a capital purchases account or sale asset account. So they will sometimes throw it in there just to keep things moving. Or when they do get time, they will reach out and ask the question on how to record it properly. So just to create a holding account of sorts until you have time to touch base with your accountant or bookkeeper.
Yep. And then there was a question there about advantages of closing out your books at the year end. Closing out your books, I do want to mention two brief comments on that. When we talk about, closing out the books in our accountant speak, it's not necessarily something that happens on 12/31/2024. Closing out the books actually happens more necessarily after the tax return is complete. There's quite a few adjustments that usually need to be made. A lot of that could be concerning your asset sales. If we have to move around some expense accounts, some expenses, say you put something in a donation, but you received that's something else I want to talk about. Sorry. When it comes to donations versus marketing or advertising, if you receive any sort of acknowledgement, so let's say you donate to your child's school, but yet your business name goes on a banner for all the basketball games. That's not a donation, it's advertising. So that's kind of something you have to look for there too. So we make a lot of adjusting entries when you were doing your tax return based upon what we find when we're going through your books. So technically, the year-end closing process doesn't happen until your tax return has been filed. One thing that we do suggest, especially if you have quote unquote a lot of hands in the pot, you have a lot of people in your QuickBooks file, is we do suggest setting a closing date for those books. So you get your tax return back at the end of the year. You want to make sure that nothing has changed, your income still aligns, everything like that. And then you set a closing date. And how you do that is you go into your preferences and set that closing date. We can help you with that step. And you put a password protected lock on that. So 2024 tax return is done in April. And you go in and you set that closing date and password. That way you know that nobody's going back and changing anything, accidentally putting an expense or an invoice or something like that in 2023. And then we close that down. It's definitely something that we suggest, like I said, especially if you have quite a few users who are going in and out of that file a lot.
And we can demo that when we start sharing our screen. So on closing books.
I was going to say, does anybody want to see how that is done? It's pretty simple. I can go ahead. I do have a sample file. Where's my mouse? Here we go. I do have a QuickBooks desktop file open, so I'll go ahead and show you how to do that. Click share. All right, can everybody see my screen here?
Yes.
All right, so to set it in QuickBooks Desktop, you're going to go here to your preferences. So your edit menu and then your preferences. Wow, it's going to open up, of course, on a different window. Can you see that, or since it opened up a separate window, is it not?
You can see it.
Okay, so then you're going to come up here to Accounting and Company Preferences. And here is where you're going to set that date. Why does it keep opening on a separate window? Here is where you would set your closing date and password. So the purpose of the password is, let's say there is something that you absolutely positively have to go back in and fix or post in the prior year. That is the purpose here of this closing password. So let's say your accounting firm says, hey, I need you to post this journal entry or something of that effect. So we have you close the dates as of 12/31/2024, but want you to add another journal entry of 12/31/2024. Having this password here will allow you to still post that. Any other questions related to year-end purposes? I think we have them. I'm going to let Mandy talk on merging the vendors and stuff. Oh, we do have a couple chats coming in. Okay, Mandy already took care of that. Thank you, Mandy. I think that was it. I'm going to let Mandy speak on merging of the vendors. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so she can share hers. I'm going to let her speak a little bit on merging vendors because that's kind of 1099 speak. So I'll let her start the 1099 process.
Okay. Merging vendors. It's best to name them exactly the same thing. And QuickBooks, I know.
Mandy, hold on just a second. We did just have one question come in. Even if you are a nonprofit, yes, I suggest closing out year end, especially for, I help a couple of nonprofits and they are very, very particular on what year donations were coming in. Is it a 2023 contribution? Is it a 2024? So that would be another step and another best practice to make sure that all of your contributions or expenses are being recorded in the correct year. And on that note, you can also set it for fiscal years. So let's say that your contribution campaign runs from June to the next May 31st. You can set that closing date on June 1st or May 31st, whichever you prefer. So it doesn't have to be the 12/31 year end date. You could do it on a monthly basis if you liked. That year end close date could be anywhere. To access the detail after closeout, you can still go in. You can view those transactions. You just won't be able to edit that. So I hope that helps. All right, Mandy, I'll let you talk now.
So I'll just say on that, the kind of benefit of closing the books, if you will, is so that you can't go back and change prior numbers, prior year information. Like, especially it's important, like once your audit has been started or once the tax return has been started, to not go back and change things in the year that we're currently working in or trying to close out. So when you set those closing dates with a password, it kind of prompts you to think about that a little bit. Like, do I really want to make this change in a prior year? And that's why you have the password prompt there. So kind of to stop and think about that. So it's just the benefit of, we don't want to go back once a year has been closed officially, either by your auditor or by your tax accountant, that you're not going back and changing prior year data. So that's kind of the importance there. And it doesn't do anything as far as you looking at it. Like, you can still see all the transactions. It's just if you go to change something, and even if you inadvertently change something, like, it's still going to prompt you for that password. So that's like, oh, do I really want to do this?
How to view, I'm assuming you mean those expenses and those transactions. You can still like search if you know what the amount is. You can go in through the vendor. You would still view it the same way. You just would not be able to edit it. So whatever you are trying to look for, you would still search it as if it was a current year transaction. You would be able to view it all the same way. You just would not be able to edit it.
Yeah. Setting the date doesn't change any of the data. It just kind of stops you from changing the data. Like, you can still view and move around in QuickBooks as you would. It just kind of prompts you to not change that prior year data that's already been reconciled via financials or tax return officially. So hopefully that helps clarify the closing and whatnot.
Yes, Nancy, that is correct. So her question was, her calendar year is July 1 to June 30. So the closing date would be June 30.
Okay. Let me find my QuickBooks. All right. Did QuickBooks come up?
Yep, you're all good.
Okay. So again, I am in a desktop file, but QBO kind of works a little bit the same. And I do have one of those open as long as I don't get logged out of it. But when you're going through the year-end process for 1099s, it's a good idea to make sure that your vendors are cleaned up, your transactions are cleaned up. And if you do have vendors with the same name, like, you can merge them. They just have to be named the same. And then QuickBooks will kind of do its thing in merging that vendor to one. A good place to start, if you've not done 1099s before, is QuickBooks has mapping in both desktop and online. You can do this. So the way to get to that mapping, if you go to your preferences and down to tax 1099, company preferences, in here, you can map your
Sample companies are great.
And yeah, you can map it here. Do you want to? I've not seen these. It's been a minute since I've seen these.
I would do, yes, I think.
That should get me. Okay. Here's oh, I can't make it bigger. Sorry. So we are mapping, I don't even know which one I selected. I think NEC was first. So you just want to hit your accounts, and your main accounts that you're going to want to look for is anybody. So let me back up. 1099s are required to be sent out to any subcontractor that is providing services for you that you are paying them more than $600, who is not a corporation, with the exception of attorneys and veterinarians, which I don't think that's going to apply to anybody on the call today. So if you're paying a vendor more than $600, they need to be issued a 1099 at the end of the year. That is, and so the common accounts, your repairs and maintenance, your sometimes advertising, like your cleaning lady, your accountant, like those, just think service.
Landscapers.
Yeah. Service industries. So you would want to map them, and it's kind of a two-step process. You have to when you're setting up the vendor, you mark it in there, and I'll show that too. And then you actually map the accounts. You tell QuickBooks which accounts that you want it to look in. I think I usually start with show all accounts, because I feel like the 1099 accounts just doesn't, there might be accounts that you need to look in that it's not necessarily pulling up. Miscellaneous is one that I always pick up for clients, because who knows what they're posting in there. Why is my screen not scrolling? Goodness. So repairs and maintenance, and this is just mapping it to which box it's going to go to in on the 1099. Automobile might be. Cost of goods, not usually, except for the subcontractor one here. Cost of goods is usually just your cost of materials. Some legal fees. Rent is actually going to go onto a 1099 miscellaneous. So I'm doing NEC right now, so I don't want to put that onto here. Repairs would be non-employee comp. This might be picked up in here. Professional fees. Printing could be. Doesn't another screen normally pop up here?
It should, but I'm wondering if, since we're in a sample file, if it won't.
Yeah. Okay, it should have popped up another screen that.
Is it on a different window?
No, I don't have anything else. Well, this is not going as planned. Let's see. We'll go in and do the rent one.
I think because you're just mapping right now and not.
But it would still pop up another screen with all of the, you don't have this information for your vendors. That's what I was expecting to see.
Oh, somebody in the chat just brought up a very good thing. I think we might be in multi-user mode and not single user. Are you in single user?
Maybe. I don't know. But we'll speak on the second part of this, the second part of the mapping. If you go into your vendor center, to your vendors, this guy probably needs a 1099. under your tax settings, this is where you enter the tax ID and mark him to be eligible for a vendor or for a 1099. And then when you have all of your mapping done, you can print a report. It's probably not going to come up. So your 1099 report is under reporting 1099 summary. And you can see you can select between NEC and miscellaneous. So that's the thing with QuickBooks. If you've got interest or some of those other odd, uncommon 1099s, QuickBooks does not track those and does not allow you to print from the software.
I'm going to start going through some of these questions here, Mandy.
Okay.
Had quite a few come in.
There's one of the screens I was looking for. Apparently, get to it a different way. So here's all of the 1099 vendors. This is kind of what the mapping looks like. And if you're filing from QuickBooks, these are the screens that you're going to see. It's just making sure that you have all of your complete data. Back into the mapping. And then you can view this way too.
So there's a couple questions here, Mandy, about what if you have hired contractors that do not provide you with a W-9 to send them a 1099? What is you as a business's obligation for 1099s? So basically, you have a vendor who's like, well, I don't want to report the income. Don't send me a 1099. What do you do as the
Not pay them.
Yeah.
So actually it's recommended that if you know you could potentially be running into a 1099 issue, a vendor issue, send them a W-9, actually have them complete a W-9 before they even start any services for you. And if you don't get it completed and they have services start and you're starting to send payment, then send it with the first payment. And if you're still not getting it completed, don't send any more payments until you get that W-9 completed. Technically, I mean, I can tell you the way that some of our partners handle it or some of why we have handled it. If we're not issuing a 1099, it doesn't get deducted on a tax return. It becomes a draw or a non-deductible expense. I don't know that there's as much is there a lot of are you getting a lot of pushback? Because I don't know that I've seen that in recent years.
Well, a situation I'm thinking is, so let's say you have somebody who pays your bills. You're not necessarily keeping track of it through the year. You know, it's a larger company and, you know, you have somebody who comes in part-time to pay the bills and just isn't paying attention to subcontractors and getting those tax IDs. So now it's year end, you haven't talked to this vendor in 8 months and they won't send you a 1099, won't send you a W-9. What do you do then?
We have also issued 1099s without a tax ID using all nines. Federal, you can still do, well, you could still do it last year. I'm kind of curious as what the system has changed this year, so I'm not sure if we'll still be able to do it or not. Pennsylvania does not allow you to file a 1099 with all nines. So you can do it that way. You can still issue the 1099, assuming you have the entity's address. You can still issue the 1099 with keeping in mind you will get a notice from the IRS that your information that you provided does not match their records. So it's a mismatch notice. First one you're okay on. If you get more than one on the same vendor, I would caution, because then the rules state that you should be withholding 28% before you even issue payment to them. So that's kind of another thing. If a vendor's refusing a W-9, you know, you can threaten the 28% withholdings, because that's what the rules say. But it really shouldn't. I mean, and then I've also run across where some vendors want that 1099 because that's how they're reporting their income, which not necessarily correct. So you run all kinds of scenarios. So it's not really, if you're issuing 1099 without a tax ID the first year, it's not really a big deal. You can issue federal with just the nines, and like I said, you will get a notice. So just keep that in mind, but make every effort to get that W-9 completed.
So yeah, there was a couple questions here. Again, follow up on that. They use state laborers for multiple days and they refuse to fill them out, but we need the help. How does that work? And then they hire flight nannies online and none of them will complete a W-9. We would not be able to hire anyone doing this type of service if it required a W-9. Don't have the addresses. It's a tough situation.
That's going to be talk to your accountant on how they're, I can, like I said, some of ours, if we don't issue a 1099, they just don't get the deduction for the expense. We either take it as a non-deductible or it becomes a draw. So it's a case-by-case scenario, but I don't have a lot that have refused to complete a W-9. I do have clients that just don't issue some vendors 1099, so we just don't take the expense. So it's a case-by-case scenario, but that's kind of what happens. First year, you're just going to get a notice if you issue it without a tax ID. And then if you're not getting addresses or anything, yeah, that's a definite talk to your accountant.
And then, yes, unfortunately, that is a workaround. Could you pay them up to $599.99 and then find another employee?
You could.
You didn't hear that, folks. Didn't hear that from here.
It's definitely a workaround, not advice. Yeah. I mean,
workaround, definitely not something we're going to say, absolutely do that. Only pay them $599.99.
Could it be coincidental?
But that is definitely a workaround. And then Mandy, a lot of questions coming in also about grants. We have a lot of townships here. So if you want to kind of discuss grants and where all that goes and how that works.
So I am very new to this topic. The 2023 filing season was really my first experience with it. But with that, it would be on a 1099-G in box, I believe it was box 6.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Let me see if I did have information pulled up on this. If I can find the right one. And
is this for people who are receiving grants or is this for people who are issuing grants?
Who asked?
So if you're a business who received a grant.
You can unmute yourself for further clarification.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I work for a conservation district and we issue funds to farmers. And last year I had issues with the farmers saying that they shouldn't have had to pay taxes on those fundings. Well, there's no free money in this world anywhere. And I said, you got the money. I'm sorry, but my auditor said that you should receive a 1099 because it was definitely over $600. So that was a big issue. We have a bunch of admins within the conservation districts. I spoke with many of them. Some used a 1099-G. Some of them just used the regular 1099 NEC. I don't want to run into this problem again this year. And this is an ongoing program. It's so kind of looking for a direction on which one I should actually be using, the 1099-G and I see someone saying agricultural grants. I don't know if it's could be considered agricultural or not. It's just a program that the state has created. But they definitely are getting money to upgrade their farms. So it's substantial amounts of money.
Right. So kind of the difference between the miscellaneous, the NEC, and the G is going to be how they're taxed. Miscellaneous is used for rent. The NEC is going to be subject to self-employment tax. So that's kind of why if you issued an NEC, that's probably why the farmer was a little hesitant. The 1099-G, it works a little bit differently. It goes into, and I'm not a Schedule F expert by any means, but it's where it's reported at on the tax return is kind of how it is the difference there. So typically, yes, these would be issued on a 1099-G. I was trying to find, I actually did a quick presentation on this a few months ago to one of the conservation district meetings. Again, I'm not an expert in this area by any means, and it's just from the research that I did with the issues that I ran into back in January for filing all of this, but it was reported on a 1099-G in box 6 based on lots of resources that I was able to pull off of the internet and with other districts, other conservation districts, not necessarily in the state of Pennsylvania either. So if you were getting a little pushback from the farmer, it's probably because you did issue it on a 1099 NEC, which is probably not correct. Making it subject to self-employment tax.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. So, I mean, and he can, even though you issued a 1099-C NEC, like that can be changed on the tax return. So, or he could have just requested a corrected 1099 to make it a 1099-G. So,
okay. I see Rylan answered. She knows exactly the ACAP. That is the program that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So, okay. I think I got a good answer. Thank you, ladies. I'll mute myself again.
Yeah, so I think the important thing to remember here is obviously we have a lot of conservation and townships and everything. So I think what we want you to take from this is if you are issuing grants, you need to do a 1099-G. If you are receiving grants, that's a whole other ballgame. So that's not, you're going to be the one receiving the 1099, not issuing the 1099.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Hopefully that clarifies that. Kendra, you on top of those 25 questions that are sitting?
That's what I'm trying to go back through and just make sure that everything.
Did we miss any other 1099 general?
One thing, Mandy, that we discussed before here was going through and cleaning up your vendors and merging vendors. If you want to touch on that real quick.
Yeah, I think I did. The quickest way to clean them up is to make sure that they're named the same thing, and QuickBooks will merge them. So give them the identical names and QuickBooks will merge them. It'll prompt you.
And then do you also want to go over into QuickBooks Online and show how to turn 1099 tracking on in there?
Yes, I can do that. So this is what a print preview in desktop will look like of your 1099s, and then they're printed on the actual forms. So just let me get out of that. All right, and in here, you go into your vendor. So I'm in online now.
You're still showing desktop.
Okay, on my screen, I'm in online.
I love sharing screens.
Well, I thought I picked the window, but apparently I did not. All right. I'm going to do window. Okay. Can we see online now?
Susan, I think I need some clarification on your question, if you don't mind unmuting yourself. The question is, sometimes when a vendor completes a W-9 form, the vendor account needs to be set up for where payments are submitted and not how a 1099 should be prepared. Are you discussing like addresses, or can you just kind of clarify that?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Sometimes they will give us a W-9 form, but then when we need to submit payments and the payment address, it is completely different than the information on a 1099 form or the W-9 form. Therefore, when we need to prepare the 1099s, sometimes we need to go in prior to printing the 1099s to make sure the information is per the W-9 form and not where the information was submitted. So my question is, how do you avoid having to go back in at the very end to correct all that? Does that make sense?
Yes. Do you want to answer this, Mandy, or do you want me to?
They're not just changing the print name, they're changing address and all of it.
So kind of like a shipping address versus a billing address situation?
Well, yeah, sometimes like you have another company or another address where the payments need to be submitted, but it's not the name or the address that's on the W-9 forms.
So QuickBooks will allow you to do a different name, but I don't know that it allows you to have two different addresses though.
Besides the billing and the shipping, but I don't know which 1099. I would assume the 1099 would get sent to the same billing address, but
yes, it's picking up.
I'm not sure how that works on the 1099 screen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like sometimes they'll want like the W-9 form may have their company name and doing business as and so forth. But then when they send an invoice, they want the payment being sent to like a different address.
Yeah.
So then we have to change the information in order to do the 1099s, which is time consuming as well.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely is. Yeah, I know you can change the printed name, but I'm not aware of having two different addresses. Is anybody else that's on the call from SEK aware of that? Keeping that information?
Yeah, I've just been trying to research that a little bit. So
I can say that that's something that I've not seen very often. The name, yes. The address, no.
Yeah. I would almost want to play around with that before I said, yeah. Emily from our Hagerstown office says, I sometimes use the shipping address for the other invoice address. So I would say my assumption is with how QuickBooks, at least QuickBooks Desktop would work. QuickBooks Online can sometimes have a mind of its own. That the 1099 would be issued to the billing address, whatever is being used for where you're sending invoices or bills or anything like that. That would be my assumption.
Okay,
that's correct. That's where it's pulling from for that information.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
So this is where you mark it in Desktop. Now, did it?
Yeah, we see you online now.
Yeah. Okay. I thought I picked that before, but apparently I did not. So identifying 1099 vendors in online is done in their vendor setup. And do we have one here that's, we'll say these mug people maybe. we're just going to add one. Oh, it doesn't like that?
I mean, clearly that's a legitimate. Yeah.
What was different?
Maybe because you didn't physically type it in.
I don't know. All right.
I think if it's under contractor, it automatically does 1099s. You would have to go into the vendors to show them the 1099 tracking.
Well, I tried to open up a vendor and it wouldn't give it to me in there either. There it is.
Yeah.
So into the vendor, edit, and identify them as a 1099 vendor.
And typically that EIN screen would be available. The only reason, or that EIN box there under additional info would be available. It's just because there's something already there, it's truncating it.
Right.
So if there wasn't an EIN in there, it would allow you to enter that information there.
And then, yeah. So now,
how was your cleaning?
why did it not pull anything
Let's
over?
go.
Vendor. Oh, I just closed out.
That's pretty normal for you.
Do you have it open?
But
I do. Just a reminder to please make sure you're muted. Can you stop sharing, Mandy?
Yeah, and then I will reopen one up while you're sharing. Navigate me in QBO.
Where is my... Oh, it kicked me out. Hold on, I gotta get logged back in.
So we're both logged out of QBO right now.
I love getting timed out of QBO. CFO, continue.
Sounds like you're in faster than me.
Yep, it's opening now. All right, so do you want me to just go with it? Or
yeah, navigate me back. Just share your screen.
Can you see?
I can.
Okay.
But what I just saved, I wonder if that's going to show up in your sample file.
Probably not.
Probably not. Which I would have to redo it too.
Yeah. So let's go in here.
Just pick one.
Yeah.
How properties, I think, is the one. Edit to vendor. Market for 1099. I don't know if it was, I don't know if it was the year.
That's what I'm thinking.
Because there's expenses there.
That's rent, yeah.
So I'm not sure. Try the miscellaneous. Well, yeah, it should still pull up on that report though. You have to have type. The screen has changed a little bit since I last used it.
Yeah, theoretically, that should be coming up here.
That is where you track your vendors at, though.
Yeah.
And it should pull to that report. I will say that the 1099 reporting in QBO is a lot nicer than the 1099 reporting in desktop because it provides you all of the information in one spot.
It very well just be because it's a sample file. But yes, if you have vendor tracking turned on, like Mandy said, when you go to 1099 filings, it should be there. Because I don't even think you would have to have this selected for it to.
And again, we can take input from the other SEK folks that are on. Are we missing a step? Because this is what I've normally done.
I think, yeah, you were going this way. Yeah, nothing's coming through if you download either.
So do we have some new questions in the chat here? Can you print a 1099G from QuickBooks Desktop? You cannot. Still nothing.
No, still nothing.
Still nothing.
Yeah, because we have it selected under the vendor.
Well, you can get the gist of the report, like it will identify like all of your information. Like it's showing you the shell of the report, it's just not pulling any of the data over for whatever reason. And again, refreshing the screen, when you're flipping. And it could be the limitation with the sample file. I don't. Try a year.
And could it be, what if we go back to prior year?
Nothing. Nothing. Wow.
Because my first thought was, I wonder if it's because we're not in the right time frame.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't be able to issue 1099s until January anyway.
Right.
Kendra and Mandy, I did get a message the other day when I went into a live file to try to work on W-2s that said it wouldn't be available till like the end of November because of they were making updates for the new year. So that might be the timing thing too.
Yeah. So it's just, you can see the shell, what the report would actually look like. So yeah, we're kind of limited there. That's the report that you're going to get. And if you look at the top of the instructions, print below when you have finished. It will walk you through the module. The module will walk you through on printing and filing your 1099s. I do believe there are additional fees to e-file them out of QBO. There are also additional fees to e-file them out of QuickBooks Desktop. We don't, at least the Chambersburg office doesn't actually e-file anything from QuickBooks. We have a third-party software that we do that, but we do use these reports, which, like I said, the QBO report is a lot nicer than the QuickBooks Desktop report because it will give you info, like you can see like the vendor name is there, the address, their tax IDs there, and then the amount. Whereas in the QuickBooks Desktop report, you don't get all of that information on the same report. You have to run a separate report for your vendors. So QBO reporting is much nicer for 1099 vendors than QuickBooks Desktop. So I will give them kudos there. I wish Desktop would get that, but we know that that's not going to happen because Desktop has mostly gone away. So.
And do you also want to touch on e-filing versus paper filing? That was a question we had before we started here.
What's this other question? Can you print 1099 AC that is mailed to vendor from QBO? I think you can print them, but it's not going to be on an official form. Like you're just going to get, like, unless you have the pre-printed forms from the IRS or another software vendor, it's just going to show, like when I had desktop up, it's just going to show the data. It's not going to show the actual boxes and whatnot.
Yeah. And to do so, you would just click this download button and it'll create a zipped file. And then in that zipped file would be what was sent to the vendor.
So QuickBooks does not handle, like I said, they handle 1099, NEC, and miscellaneous well. They do not handle any other forms. You can, however, track them in QuickBooks by using the other box information. And it's just kind of a thing, and that you just know these vendors are for 1099Gs and these vendors are for NECs. And unfortunately, you can't, yeah, I don't know what to say about that. Like I said, QuickBooks only handles miscellaneous and NEC well. All of the other ones, there's workarounds that can be done to get the information that you need. So I will say that. So work with your bookkeeper, your accountant, or whatever to talk about those workarounds. But it can be done. It can be tracked. It's just not going to print out on a nice form for you like the NEC or the miscellaneous will. Hopefully that helps. We had a lot of conservation districts reach out to us last year to do the e-filing on these 1099Gs for two reasons. Their softwares didn't do it, and because they did not have, I can't think of they weren't able to e-file last year, and the PIN or the credentials that they needed were not updated in time and weren't going to be updated in time. So they had to look to a third party, like their accounting firm, to do the e-filing for them. So that's what I'll say about the 1099Gs. And more on e-filing versus paper filing. So I guess it was 2 years ago, the IRS set a threshold of any forms, 10 or more forms needed to be e-filed. So if you have 8 employees and you issue 2 1099 vendors, technically that triggers the threshold for everything needs to be e-filed. So it's not looked at individually, it's looked at total forms as a whole. So if you automatically already have 10 employees and you only issue 1 1099, well, you got to e-file that 1 1099. Like I said, I think that came out 2 years ago. And another thing that I find in talking to a lot of non-clients is there is also a compliance issue with the state of Pennsylvania for submitting those 1099 NECs that you file to the IRS. They also should be submitted to the state. So, is there any 1099 stuff that I missed? Did I get all of the questions?
So any other 1099 questions before we head over into W-2 world?
I feel like that was a lot of 1099 information.
Can't remember. Can you see my desktop file or my online? I can't remember if I shared window or shared.
I could see online. And PA, does 1099 do miscellaneous need to be submitted? No. It's your NECs.
Let's do this. I'll just share the whole window from now on.
And I feel like that's the state just looking like for these small mom and pop people that are not reporting all of their income, to be honest with you. If you use QuickBooks Intuit, does it automatically send W-2s and 1099s? I believe that depends on the payroll subscription you're going to have if you're using QBO. Correct, Kendra?
Yes. So for
1099s, I'm not sure.
I
think
don't think QuickBooks Online. Oh, for desktop, no.
no, they don't automatically do it.
Neither W-2 or 1099. They're all, you have to go in and physically push the button.
Yeah.
Give it just a couple more seconds for 1099s. Yes, push the button through into it. And I'll show you how you can e-file the W-2s here through desktop in just a couple seconds. All right, so we will start moving over into W-2 world here. I will go ahead and preface this by saying QuickBooks Online is not going to let me do anything W-2 related in their sample file. It is very annoying, but I'll go ahead and try to give you as much information as I can without having something to physically show you. Mandy, Amy's question there, does that 10 form limit work the same when I use another company for payroll and QuickBooks for 1099s? I believe it's EIN.
It is EIN related.
Based.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you're using the same EIN, or if you're using different EINs, then obviously your limit would be 20, but it is EIN on that form limit.
Yes.
So before we start with the W-2 portion, there was a couple questions I wanted to touch on that are payroll related. The pay liability screen for the question was, can you delete a liability balance without affecting accounts? The simple answer to that is no. First off, accountants do not like that word delete. We don't like the word delete. It is a 4-letter word in our office. So, we used to have a swear jar and it filled up because too many people used the word delete. No, just kidding. So we did have a swear jar. Definitely recommend voiding over deleting. I'll get off that soapbox really quick. If you delete something, it is gone forever. If you void, there is still a record of it. You can still follow that paper trail. And that goes for desktop or online. Back to the question, can you get rid of liability balances without affecting the accounts? Again, the answer is no. What we suggest, and thankfully I can show you this example here in our sample file. So let's say this 9879 here is something that you paid another way. It's just, it needs to disappear essentially. What we suggest you do is going in here and clicking this View Pay button and bring the window up to the screen. And then, so this looks just like a regular check you're writing. And then you can see down here these two different tabs, the pay, liabilities, and the expense. What we always suggest you do is you go over here to this expense account and just find some sort of miscellaneous payroll expense account. And you can just offset that by doing a negative 9879 and then change your check amount to 0. So what this is essentially going to do is it's going to clear out that liability amount for you and throw it to expense. Another option that you can do is you can actually go in and adjust this payroll liability. Sometimes this gets a little more convoluted, but you can go in here and click this Adjust Payroll Liabilities. I think it's going to let me do this. Pick your date here, and this would be obviously for the company, not for an employee specifically. And yeah, it's not going to bring up that liability for us. So of course it's not. It was unemployment, wasn't it? I think that I was looking at. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to do the 9879. And then you would click your OK button here. And that would change it. All right. So that's how you would clear that liability. You can either do it through a check form or through your employees and your adjust payroll liabilities. Yeah, I tried the account. It's not letting me do it. I don't know. I tried going into that accounts affected and it's just popping up with nothing. So I think it's probably a sample file related issue here. Oh, come on, go away. All the fun little pop-up windows. So that's two options there for adjusting those payroll liabilities. Something else that was brought up here in the screen is, I know we have a lot of townships and unemployment is super fun with you guys. You have PSATs and all the other different forms of unemployment. How to set those up, I don't want to spend a lot of time just because it is kind of something that's very specific to you. However, to properly allocate those, you would go up here into your list and you would do your payroll item list. And I have seen where people literally set up the item name as PSATs and setting up as PAUC. Doesn't really matter what you name it, but what you're going to do, I need to go down here. So you go down here to payroll item, and you can just do a new payroll item. And you can go through the process to set up the unemployment for PSATs. And for anybody who's not township related, so for a lot of our townships, municipalities, they have two different places that they pay unemployment to. So whereas a normal small business pays everything to PAUC, some of these townships pay to different groups for each of those. So you would just go through the motions here and do your unemployment. Is it going to let me set up an unemployment? Trying to think, state tax. And then obviously for this, it would be Pennsylvania, state unemployment, next. And then here is where you can change the name, enter the name for the company paid. The employee you could take out because you're already going to have another line set up for that. So that's how we would go through. You would select your agency, select your expense account. So if you have a specific employer paid SUTA, then you would select that. And then here is going to be where you put in your rates for that. I think a lot of them are like 0.03, 0.09, whatever you would like to put in there, you certainly can. And then you would just finish the setup. And then you would go into the employee and make sure that that is added as a withholding. And if any of our townships or municipalities need further clarification, you can just reach out to myself or Mandy after this, and we can kind of help you with those specifics and make sure. It is kind of I don't want to call it a long or monotonous process, but it is kind of a little bit more than we have time to go over here in a more detailed form. And we can also help you with setting up for the filings of that as well. I think that was it as far as questions besides general W-2 filing. Looking over my list there. Okay. So for W-2 filing, there's a couple things you want to make sure you're doing. And there was S-Corp questions here. So for those who are S-Corps, if you have personal use of auto, if you have shareholders' health information, you would need to add that information before you go in to process your W-2s. And that is in desktop or online. And how you would do that is you would essentially just do an unscheduled payroll, and you would have to add those payroll items as far as shareholders' health, personal use of auto. We can kind of help you with those calculations. Again, that's another kind of client-specific thing. That's a little bit more than the general overview that we're going to give today. So we can certainly help you with that. We do suggest a struggle that we have here with some of our clients is getting that personal use calculation done, especially if it's somebody who is quite heavy in their mixing of personal use and business use. There is a lot of good apps out there now to track mileage. But again, you have to rely on that person. And personal use does go above and beyond S Corp sometimes. That is a benefit that a lot of people kind of miss client wide is if you have somebody, I forget the exact rules. Mandy, you might be able to help me with this. I forget what the exact rules are. But if you are letting a employee use a company-owned vehicle for more than just driving around while they're on the clock. So if they're taking that vehicle back and forth to home, if they're going and picking up their kids from school, if they're making grocery runs, if they're using that vehicle as a benefit or as a personal vehicle, it is an employee benefit. So all that information needs to be tracked.
It's a fringe benefit. It's a type of fringe benefit.
Yeah. So that's kind of something that a lot of people miss. They don't realize that that is a monetary benefit. And it's this whole calculation based on mileage, the value of the vehicle, all the things. You also can, without getting into too much, and again, this is a conversation you need to have with your accountant, is do you do the personal use calculation versus mileage? I think mileage right now is up to 0.56 or 58 cents or something. So that's kind of a conversation you need to have with your accountant there, is which method you prefer. The personal use does go on their W-2 as a I believe personal use is for more than just S Corp, correct? Yeah, I was gonna say I think that is no matter what tax form you file at the end of the year, that personal use
it's a W-2 function.
Yeah, it's a W-2 related thing. So it's for more than just the owners.
And I guess if it's a partnership, then it would be considered some sort of part of their guaranteed payment. So it's still a transaction that needs to happen on the P&L.
Yeah. One thing I will say, going to switch gears to QuickBooks Online specific here. I don't believe in this. This is kind of something that we've been complaining about. I don't know if it has changed, but I do just want to preface that. QuickBooks Desktop will let you retro date a payroll a lot further back than QuickBooks Online will. I think QuickBooks Online, it's only like 5 or 6 days. It's basically essentially whenever that tax payment is going to be due. Mm-hmm. So I will say that if you are in QuickBooks Online and you know you're going to have to do one of these calculations, sooner rather than later. I would say 1 to 2 business days after the year end there, that needs to be done. QuickBooks Online does not like you making late tax payments. And some of these benefits are taxable. Well, all of them are taxable to some degree or to some entity. So I will say if you are in QuickBooks Online, this is not a project that you can kind of put off until the 5th, 6th, 7th of January. I would go ahead and start getting that mileage calculated as close to the end of the year as possible, just so you're not running into any issues there. And then the QuickBooks Online will now allow you to choose whether you want to pay taxes as you go or as a liability. Yes, but I think it's still going to give you problems with a payroll after year end. So I think that, yes, it does give you that option, but I don't know if it will let you create that liability too far out.
And Kendra, just a comment on that. So something like personal use auto is one of those where you could do like December to November so that you're calculating and then that would go on the W-2 for that year. So it's one of those that they give a little bit of leeway on how you're calculating. So instead of waiting till the end of December and then trying to rush and get it together, if you start that personal use from December of last year and then cut it off at November 30th, that way that gives you the whole month of December to get it included. That's one of those fringe benefits that you can kind of have a little bit of timing, like wiggle room with.
Yeah. Good point there, Emily. Thank you for that. But then the preface to that is make sure you're being consistent year to year. Make sure that everything is being, you're not doing a November to October this year and then, skip over November of 23 and just start with December. So consistency is key with everything payroll related. So just kind of keep that in mind there as well. Any other questions before we dig into actual W-2 processing? Again, very limited, going to try and do my best for QuickBooks Online, but we'll do QuickBooks Desktop here. It's actually going to let me do everything here. So QuickBooks Desktop W-2 processing, we do have some employees in here, which is very nice. I'm not going to actually be able to walk through this process completely, but of course we're here in 2026 because sample files are great. So what we're going to do here is we're going to come over to we're in our payroll center, obviously, and we're going to go here to file forms. What we're going to be looking at then is the annual form, W-2, W-3, wage and tax transmittal form. Obviously, this is federal. And we're going to click create forms. And then this lovely box pops up. We're going to do all employees, and we're going to do for the year of 2026. Another pop-up will come up, and we're going to, oh my golly, I love QuickBooks pop-ups. So then we're going to have this window pop up. This is for selecting the employees for Form W-2, W-3. Obviously, you're going to want to create the all. The only reason you wouldn't create all is if, let's say, you were late getting that personal use of auto or that shareholders health for one of your owners, and you wanted to go ahead and get everybody else's out the door, you could unselect that one particular employee. But for purposes of today, we're just going to go ahead and do all of the employees. Once we click review and edit, this window is going to pop up. I don't know if oh, that's way too big. Let's make that small again. All right, so this is going to be what they call the interview process. This is going to be where you go through and just make sure all your settings are set up correctly. I do want to preface by saying, please don't just fast forward through all this. Actually take the time and kind of review what you're looking at here. So we're going to go down through, I need to move my computer screen a little closer here. And we're going to click next. And this is going to be the employer portion of the interview here. So this is going to be all of the company information. So obviously you want to make sure that all your contact information is correct, your phone numbers, all of this, because that will get transmitted over to the W-3. Here is where you will make sure that all of these boxes are correct. So most people here are going to be a 941 filer. Agricultural would be 943. I don't think we have any household employers on the call today, but just if you are an agricultural entity, make sure you're clicking the 943. Here's where you would do what kind of employer you are. Obviously, here's where you would put your state and local government. Any sort of special situations, any if you have employees with retirement plans, third-party sick pay, or statutory employees. Again, don't think we have any statutory employers here, but obviously if you have a 401k, simple plan, pension, anything like that, you would click yes here. Your control number is issued by the IRS. I used to know that rule. That's like the first 4 digits or something, I think, for your control number. You would enter that information there. Yeah, the first 4 characters. We click next and we go into each individual W-2. So this here is all the information. I always suggest to make sure you go through and do a very quick overview on all of this. Box 14 is going to be where all of that information that we previously discussed is going to be. So your personal use of auto will go in here, your shareholders' health, Um, LST. LST is something that we also suggest you keep an eye on, as not necessarily as much in QuickBooks Desktop, but QuickBooks Online, and we'll go over that here in a little bit with some of our pain points of QuickBooks Online. So here is where you want to make sure all of that information is showing up. So your personal use, your shareholders' health, all of that information there. I also want to make sure your local wages. This is something that we kind of see a lot too. Your local wages, for the most part, are going to match your state wages, especially for the state of Pennsylvania.
I'd say for PA, I don't know that there are any differences.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think unless something weird is out there, as far as I know, your local should always match your state for Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And then sometimes this locality name gets kind of wonky if your setup is wrong. Your locality name, for the most part in Pennsylvania, should be either 28, 29, depending on what county you are in. I've seen it multiple different ways. I don't think I've ever seen W-2s rejected for anything. Some people just put EIT. Some people put the 2-digit code for their county. I don't know if there's anything, honestly, that's ever been rejected, but just kind of make sure that there's something in there.
In theory, I believe it's for the local offices, like when those W-2s are submitted to the local offices, so they know where those withholdings, which office they were submitted to, or where to go to find their money. It's more for a local than it is for federal or state.
Something else to always look here, this apartment number here reminded me, sometimes if you do have apartment numbers, suite numbers, if you have a, like I've seen a couple employees that have like a physical address and then a PO box. If there is something that needs to be addressed here, like specific, like if they don't have a physical mailbox, kind of a mental note there to make sure that the PO box is going to be showing up there, because this is going to be what we print here. Go through, make sure everything looks right, make sure that your social security numbers are in there, just kind of an overall check. Then you're going to get to a general list here. This is just, again, another quick thing to make sure everybody has a social security number, make sure everybody has box 1 wages. You know, it is a software. Unfortunately, sometimes weird stuff just does happen. So always kind of just make sure you're doing that. Then we're going to click next. This here is the W-3. I believe at this point is when, if there are any errors, you would have an error box up here. I think this is the window that pops up on. And it would say, hey, there's an issue. We can't submit this until this problem is fixed. And it does give pretty good instructions on what needs to be fixed if there is anything. Here is where you can also print for your records. You would just, so yeah, there is an issue. So obviously here is where you would do that. Once we click print, though, is where you can start to print your W-2 forms. Here's where you would do what we call 4-up, where you would have the 4. You would have your B copy, 2 copies, and a C, copy C. So this here is where you would do it for your employees. And then obviously here's all the different options that you can do. Pre-printed forms, I will say, can you buy them through Intuit? Yes. Can you buy them through Staples? Yes. And they're much cheaper through Staples. So I will go ahead and preface that yes, you can order them directly through Intuit, but you're probably going to pay more. And I will say you should probably be printing, or you should probably be ordering those sooner rather than later as well. So here's where you would print any and all of your PDFs. And then again, down here is where we're going to submit or e-file. So here's like that error box I told you. It's probably because we don't have a control number. I'm going to say, it's because we're trying to do 2026, not all that. Okay. So still don't let me, here we go. So Obviously, you would not be filing this if you still had errors. You would go through and correct those errors, and you would be in a normal business year. Here is where you would click the e-file. If you can already e-file your 941s and all that, you wouldn't have to set this up. But here is where you would click to go ahead and e-file. It will give you a confirmation once you do e-file, and it'll allow you to put your control numbers and everything like that in there, your passwords and all that. Is everybody still there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, my computer just made like that sound it usually does when everything closes out. That's why I was concerned. So that is the nuts and bolts here of the W-2 process. There we go. When you're going through QuickBooks Desktop. I think I did see some questions come through.
I answered some.
Okay.
One.
Okay. All right. So I think we're good. Any other questions while we're still in QuickBooks Desktop here?
Where do you set up e-file?
There's a couple different ways to go in about that. Oh, go away. Again, pop-ups. So the first way you can do is you can go down here to the manage the filing methods.
And you do have to be in single user mode and a company admin to do this.
Yeah.
And
I hope it's going to let us go through here. I don't know if it's going to. Probably not. Yeah, because we have to have.
yeah.
Of course. So either way, you would go down to that manage filing methods. And then that window box would pop up and you would just walk through there and it would ask for, select e-file there. Sample files. That's going to be my next complaint into it is sample files I need to be able to do everything in a sample file.
They're not going to give us that kind of control.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. Do want to touch here that you can do corrected wage and tax statements through QuickBooks Desktop. I don't know how much we want to get through, but just know that capability is there, especially with it not being a current year file. I don't want to do that. It will save filings here, so you will have PDF versions as well in QuickBooks Desktop. I do suggest, though, that you have a physical copy. What happens if your QuickBooks Desktop file crashes? What happens if you convert to online? Definitely suggest having paper copies of everything you file too many times. And that's another note. I just had this call not too long ago. I think it was last week. QuickBooks will not, this is not W-2 related. QuickBooks will not maintain PDFs of 941s you file. If let's say what this client was working on was an unemployment audit and they needed a 941 from 2021, I believe. QuickBooks will not reprint a 2021 like what you filed. It'll still say current year on there. So always suggest that you keep at least a PDF version of that with you and on your file. Can you e-file outside of QuickBooks through EFTPS or Business Services online website? Did you want to answer that?
You can, but you have to have credentials to do that. And it is an application process. That's kind of what I was talking about on the 1099s when a lot of conservation districts had to come to us as the accountant to e-file their 1099s because they did not have their credentials updated. I'm looking for what that pin is called. And when I find it, I'll let you know.
So the answer is yes, but you do have to go through a credentialing period. I know at least our office last year, whenever they changed the W-2s having to be e-filed, we did a lot of household employees where they only have one W-2. So a lot of our CPA firms, at least our offices, offering that service, obviously for a charge, but just know that is an option. Something else that I wanted to show everybody here today, that I don't think a lot of people know about is one of the reporting options that they give you.
Know what the word is. It's a TCC code, transmitter control code. That's what it is.
There you go.
You have to have that in order to e-file with the IRS.
Yeah. So this is kind of a little bit outside of W-2s, but this is payroll related. I've found that a lot of people don't know about this local tax summary, which comes out as an Excel form. So how I got there was going to reports, employees and payroll, and then the more payroll reports in Excel. They have this local tax summary out here that obviously there's no local tax here, but it would give you a listing, and a pop-up box would come in here asking for the periods. But this here would list all the local wages, how much EIT, how much LST is available. So I know a lot of people kind of struggle with doing their local filings, but this Excel sheet is out there and available to you in QuickBooks Desktop. It is not available in QuickBooks Online, and we have been complaining about that for a very long time. So hopefully they'll get on the ball with that soon. Any other desktop-related questions before we go over to online? Hopefully I'm still logged in. Yes. Okay. So like I said, unfortunately, I can't show you how the filing process happens in QuickBooks Online. But my plan is still to just kind of tell you some of the pain points that we have currently with QuickBooks Online. So a couple things to remember is LST is not considered a tax in QuickBooks Online. So for anybody who has a Pennsylvania employer that is paying LST tax, it will not automatically show up on the W-2. I don't know what we're going to have to do to them to get them to have that option out there. But so what we did as in our office last year was you literally print the W-2s to a PDF and then go in and manipulate the W-2. We went ahead and e-filed them to the federal just because the Fed does not require the LST be on there. That's more of a state thing. And then for the states, we just uploaded the PDFs with the LST information on there. And then, of course, we mailed the W-2s to the employees with that LST information on there. Yes, it is a pain. Yes, it is annoying. Yes, we are doing our very level best to get into it to see it as a tax. Probably not going to happen this year. We're going to keep fighting for it, though, for next year that is going to be an option. Something else as a pain point in QuickBooks Online is when it comes to multiple state unemployments, that is going to hold up your W-2 filings. You have to have basically everything else filed for online to process your W-2s. Again, it's pain, but I spent a lot of time on the phone with Intuit last January. I feel like I should have been one of their employees. Probably should have gotten paid by them, but kind of knew some of them by name. It'll be all right. I will say that their help feature is very helpful. If you run into an issue when you're e-filing, is it going to let me do it? Probably not. So what you can do is you can do your search feature here. Usually it pops up to like schedule a call here, but I'm wondering if it's because I'm not in an actual file, if it's not there. So typically there would be an option here to contact support. If you schedule an appointment with them and say, call me at 2:30 on Friday, for the most part, they're calling at 2:30 or at 2:31 to help you. Or you can request a call back immediately. In January, it might be a little bit longer just because there's going to be a lot more assistance needed. But for the most part, they called pretty quickly and were able to get everything taken care of. I really wish that I could show you how to do this, but I have no payroll tax options out here. I can't even create payroll in here, unfortunately. Is there any online questions that I can try to field without having the option to physically show you? Or again, any other general W-2 questions? I'm going to review my list of questions one more time while we're waiting. W-2 filing preference, pros and cons. I'm thinking right now everything is done electronically, W-2 related, like we said. I think we already kind of covered that. Back to the general ledger cleanup. There was a couple questions, with like the cleanup of your general ledger and stuff. Feel free to still submit any W-2 questions. We get a lot of questions sometimes, like how many accounts is too many accounts in a general ledger? Kind of related questions. Is there such thing as too many general accounts? Probably. However, the beauty of a general ledger is it is 100% customizable. So you can have as many or as few accounts. There was also some questions about how it lines up to Schedule C deductions and stuff like that. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that you set up your chart of accounts to match deductions and what your tax return is going to look like at the end of the year. I feel like in that case, you are going to lose too much. You're not going to have enough data. I do think there is such thing as having too small of a chart of accounts. Mm-hmm. So I would suggest, even if you're not the owner, sitting down and having a conversation. Hey, what do you want your profit and loss to look like? How many cost of goods sold accounts do you want? Do you want just a plain old purchases account? Do you want to kind of see like direct materials and then like, packaging materials? How much do you want information wise? And even if you're coming in to an existing chart of accounts, print out that chart of accounts list and sit down and say what's important, what's not important. Pull up a 5-year profit and loss and see what accounts haven't been used in 5 years and make them inactive. Especially in QuickBooks Online, there are limits in some of the smaller versions as to how many accounts you can have on that chart of accounts. So you might have to go in and inactivate them. So from an accountant standpoint, we're going to manipulate the data anyway as far as what accounts are going under which lines. You don't necessarily have to worry about that when you're creating your chart of accounts, having your profit and loss, having your balance sheet accounts and all of that. So that is kind of most definitely a case-by-case basis, and what your board of directors is looking for, what your owner is looking for, what your department needs are looking for. That is 100% completely customizable. One thing I did want to mention, if you feel like, something available out there is class tracking. So if you have multiple locations, so let's say you have 2 buildings, well, then you might have 2 separate sets of repairs and maintenance accounts, depending on how you track it. You can condense that into one and then use class tracking for building 1 and building 2. If you want to track it that way. So there's definitely many, many options out there. And that could kind of be a case-by-case discussion that we have if you guys want to discuss that further.
And another option is the use of sub-accounts.
Yeah, you can create sub-accounts. And then we can increase, decrease them as much as we want there. So I have seen 6-page P&Ls and I've seen 1-page P&Ls. Yes, class tracking is available in QuickBooks Online. I think from Plus up.
Yeah.
So there's QuickBooks Essentials is kind of like the basic. And then QuickBooks Plus and QuickBooks Online Advanced, there is class tracking available. Assisted payroll online, do they pay the LST taxes to the appropriate tax collector? QuickBooks Online and local taxes, not the best of friends right there. Me personally, I still prefer to do my QuickBooks or my local tax filings through the websites. Yes, they offer it, but I've seen too many problems. And no, they do not pay the LST taxes at all when it comes to that. So I would not suggest doing local tax filings through QuickBooks Online. Regarding the chart of accounts, I inherited this QuickBooks from a previous person. It is a train wreck. I can promise you, you are not alone. I would say 50% of my QuickBooks Online consulting revolves around chart of accounts being train wrecks. If you would like to redo the chart of accounts, what and when is the best way to do this? I would suggest first off doing it at a like 1/1 start date. You know, start 1/1 with your new chart of accounts. That's a loaded question. So I would
think maybe a starting point is export your current chart of accounts out to Excel and review that and see what you do, what you're using, what you're not using, and try and clean it up from there. Like I said, you can make those accounts inactive that you don't no longer want to use. I think you can even rename them and to more suit for what you are using them for. Just keep in mind when you are making adjustments to the chart of accounts, if you're doing any kind of comparative reports, it's going to skew those comparative reports. So just keep that in mind. But I think a starting point is export it to Excel and review it from there, and
yes,
take make your changes and whatnot. And it might even be a good idea to review it with the owner and your accountant to see what accounts that they really do need, because depending on the entity setup, the entity structure, like there are certain accounts that do need to be reported on a tax return at the end of the year and whatnot. So
I swore I saw a question about bank transactions.
We have one on the list.
And credit cards.
Yeah, we have some on the list. I actually have some stuff highlighted here that we've not yet covered.
Okay.
So setting a closing date before changing the chart of accounts. I don't know that that's necessary as long as you're not changing transactions. Keep in mind when you set a closing date, it's going to stop you from changing transactions, not necessarily moving your chart of accounts around. Yeah, we have. Well, I guess that was one, cleaning up accounts and organizing them better. Kendra, you could probably talk a little more on the difference in profit versus nonprofit. I do consulting for some nonprofits, but not nearly as much as you do.
So yes, I would say the bare bones are the same between nonprofit and profit. Where it becomes trickier is, unfortunately, a lot of those nonprofits have a lot more people to answer to. So that's kind of what I run into the most, is there is nobody who does reporting quite like nonprofits. So again, that can be kind of something that's kind of beyond the means of this webinar here today. We can kind of go over. I always say I would do profits all day long. Nonprofits can kind of get convoluted just because, back to that hands in the pots. You know, there's so many people who are wanting to see this portion of the information, this portion. So I would say, as a general overview, your nuts and bolts are the same. You know, you're still recording expenses, you're still doing all that. There's a lot more audits involved in nonprofits. We have a fantastic nonprofit group here at SEK. And we even have a nonprofit government webinar. If Christina's still on here, I've presented during it, but I can't tell you when it was. I think it was like July or September or something.
We had a governmental webinar and a nonprofit webinar separately. They were each 4-hour events. Nonprofit was in May, government was in July. And we have those each year. So we'll be planning them again for 2025.
And are they out there on the website, Christina? The recordings?
Yeah, the recordings are on our website, and also the registration is there. And if you sign up for our email updates, we'll let you know when registration's open for the next year's events.
Yeah, so shameless plug there that we do those as well. If you have other questions, I know I learn a lot every year that I attend them. I actually kind of enjoy that I'm a presenter there, that I get to listen in for free. It is, and it's free, right, Christina? We don't charge for that one either.
Yeah, it's free for everybody.
Okay. All right, so perfect. There you go. So that'll kind of give you another insight there on that, and as well as obviously we do the QuickBooks consulting on a regular basis as well. From an accountant point of view, when entering a deposit, what is proper to put for payee, our business name? Full disclosure, I hardly ever use that payee in a deposit. So full disclosure
the account
there.
that it's being deposited to and the bank that it's being deposited to. That's important.
Yeah. And if you do want to properly allocate, you can just use the memo field. I use the memo field a lot more than I use the payee field. So yeah, full disclosure on that one there. A certain small amount has been in petty cash from before I came on staff. Does not match the actual amount we have in petty cash. Very common problem. Is there a correct way to change the amount in QuickBooks with no income and or expenses? First question is going to be, what kind of business are you? Are you a township? Are you a small business? Second, how much difference are we talking? Are we talking about a couple of dollars? Are we talking about a couple hundred, couple thousand? I would hope not a couple thousand. So there's definitely a couple questions to be asked there. A couple different ways to fix that issue. I would say bring that up at year end. Conservation. Okay, $20.
It actually has to be run through the P&L because it would have been through there at some point. So is petty cash set up as an actual cash account that can be reconciled?
And I would just run it through some sort of either miscellaneous expense, miscellaneous income.
Yeah.
And as long as you make a note, there shouldn't be any issue when it comes to your audit. Honestly, your auditors would appreciate that you're making it right.
I was going to say $20 is probably going to be immaterial.
Yeah.
In the scheme of things.
Yeah. Makes you feel better. We found a safe at a district or a municipality that had unspoken for cash. So you're in way better shoes than they are. Listen, I'm a numbers girly. It would drive me nuts too. You're all good.
Good point.
Yes. Coming from somebody who's a treasurer of a nonprofit, Emily appreciates that. For anybody who doesn't have the chat up, one of our other coworkers here says for nonprofits especially, she would recommend using the payee and a deposit for donors that are contributing more than $5,000 per year, since they would need to be recorded on a separate schedule of your tax return. In that case, you would want to use the donor name as the payee. Thank you, Emily. I knew there was a reason I wanted you here today.
So I have a for-profit brain and not a non-for-profit brain. So
exactly. Yeah. Exactly. See, that's why we pay her the big bucks, people.
It's why it's helpful to have other
top of mind because I'm dealing with that right now, trying to go back through and say, okay, who gave you all this money? I need to know.
We definitely appreciate those other perspectives because it's not stuff that I run across every day. So
yeah. The bank transactions was where else we were heading there. Tips on downloading credit card activity directly into QuickBooks. Any good shortcut tips? If this person is on QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online are two very different animals when it comes to credit card activity. Or even bank feeds in general. QuickBooks Desktop, full transparency, I use that for one client to download credit card transactions. I have pretty good rules set up. I have pretty good, I have them for lack of better terms, trained well as far as the different people entering their credit card transactions, just because they have such a, they're one of those 6-page chart of accounts kind of people. So I would always suggest, if you're in QuickBooks Desktop, to try and manually enter as much as possible so you're only matching. For lack of better terms, it's a, go ahead.
I think the manual entry is a good idea, whether you're on QBO or desktop, just because it could become a timing issue either at month close or end close. Because if you're solely relying on downloading your transactions to record those transactions, the date that it's recorded in QuickBooks may not be correct.
Yep. Just because of credit card posting dates. And, I know like some of my small businesses, because of fees and transactional and everything like that, they only settle their credit card machine once a week. So you might make that purchase on Monday, but it's not hitting your credit card until Friday. So then at year end, it can become issues there. So proceed with caution anytime you're using any sort of bank feeds. Like I said mentioned earlier with the general ledger cleanup, sometimes, especially in QuickBooks Online, if you change one line to a cost of goods sold account, even though the next line is clearly a electric payment, it's going to change it to QuickBooks, or it's going to change it to the previous line item there. So that's where it can get kind of tricky. So again, and I think we discussed this in our user groups that we held there in Shippensburg, is being very, very cautious with that. It is something that you have to sit down. It is not a breeze right through it kind of thing. Been using batch entry for the credit cards, dumping the American Express into Excel, manipulating it. So you can connect your credit cards. If you're in QuickBooks Online, you can connect your credit card account the same way you do your bank accounts. In QuickBooks Desktop, it's a little bit more convoluted. I'm still sharing my screen, right?
Yes.
So you would come up here into bankings, and they have the bank feeds option. I don't know if it's going to let me go in here. Oh, wow. That's a fun error message. So this is kind of what it looks like in here. So you can add your bank accounts through here, and it actually has a credit card already in. What is that? So here you would have your transaction list. Maybe it's going to bring it up. So here's where you would go in, and you can either add more details, match to an existing transaction. You can do a quick add. I hate quick add. Definitely don't suggest. But you would just click on this add more details. And then this here is where you would edit your accounts and where you would like that to be posted against. So again, it's definitely something that I don't suggest doing. Oh, hey, I'll do this quick at the end of the day. I would say this is something, you do while you have plenty of time when you're going in here and doing that. So yes, it's a good feature, but it is definitely a proceed with caution kind of feature. Anything else? I think we hit everything.
There was a, can you turn that feature off? Was that the automatic? I'm not sure.
I think that's, I'm assuming she was talking about the AI intelligence, not really intelligent feature in QuickBooks Online. And no, unfortunately, you cannot turn the AI off in QuickBooks Online. Trust me, we've asked. Reverting back to chart of accounts to completely redo the account numbers, etc. How would you go about doing that?
I think depending on the volume of work here, this may be a scenario of, does it make more sense to start a new file?
That's kind of where I was thinking. I was like, how big of a chart of accounts are we talking? Is it going to be as simple?
And again, That's a conversation that should probably happen between multiple people, including your accountant, maybe.
Yeah.
Big and ugly.
Because so for your specific example, there is if there's a currently 500.1 bank interest, how do I make something else 500.1? You would have to go into the current account and change that account number, and then you could do that. So it is going to be a significant amount of time that you're talking about there, and a significant amount of frustration. I was reading that next question, but it's not related. So yeah, I would say that's a conversation, Susan, unfortunately, that we can't answer. It's going to definitely have to involve multiple people. And just, because obviously this is going to be a lot of your time. This is going to be a significant time investment on your end. So I would just kind of sit down, plead your case as to, this is an absolute nightmare. What can we do going forward to make this better? I would almost say that you were probably better off to just start a new company file. And I know that's not what you want to hear, but if it's that large of a chart of accounts and it's something you seriously want to give a complete overhaul to, that's going to be maybe just starting fresh. Next question, we enter journal entries for recording purposes, and I was told it makes them show up on reports. Journal entries for recording what is going to be my follow-up question there. What are you recording those journal entries for? For everything? Because I know a couple people that do that.
And so there was reverting back to the Twitter page, you can make them inactive, but if you're trying to rename or renumber them with the same number, you're going to get an error, even if they're inactive.
An auditor's nightmare is lack of detail. An auditor's nightmare is lack of a paper trail. So I like journal entries. I do a lot of stuff with journal entries. I would say as long as you're properly recording why you're doing that journal entry, and make sure that you're leaving good notes. And again, consistency is key. So as long as you're doing the same journal entry every month, and you're not doing a journal entry in January, February, and May, but not in March and April, then you should be fine.